So I wanted to mention that about mechanical equipment, because a lot of people, when they look at their replacements and they're doing construction projects and they're making a reason, it's not always because the useful life of that component is over. If let's say a mechanical piece of equipment that's using a huge amount of energy, there are very nice incentives in the state of New Jersey to get energy efficiency upgrade cost offsets, that maybe it's time to upgrade mechanical equipment because the cost of the replacement and the cost of the energy can go down significantly if you add them together. I will mention, if you want to look at it, I'm going to type it in here also on the chat. Go to this website, dsireusa.org. Now, if you there, put it in the chat room. Now, if you go to that website, what it'll show you, and I can share it at the end if you want me to, it'll show you a map of the United States, and you click on your state, and it comes up with all the incentives that are available in that state. And then you click on any of the incentives, and it'll bring you to the page and tell you how to apply for it. So dsireusa.org. Do not replace any piece of mechanical equipment or anything that uses energy in your community or in your home if you don't look first to see what incentives are that are available in New Jersey. And there are some great ones. Now, I just put in, you see this on dsireusa.org.
Yes.
Now you go to, now you go here, for example, let's go to New Jersey. Click on New Jersey. And then here you could filter, but every one of the name of any type of incentive that's available in New Jersey is here. And, just let's pick up here, state, territory, search, and there's 50 entries. So, but you go to any one of these and you click on this, and it takes you to the overview of the project, what it is, a summary, and recommended next steps. So if you don't, you should play around with that website. The website, as you can see, is pretty amazing. All right, so reasons for projects. I talked about upgrades, new amenities. Again, new amenities added to your reserve study. Natural disasters sometimes happen. We had a big flood in our office the other day. Ice damming, fire, energy efficiency, which I beat that one to death. Sources of funds for community associations. Reserves, absolutely very important, which we're all familiar with that. Assessments, borrowing, and as you know, one of the things when you do a capital improvement project in your community, let's say if a roof is leaking, you want to be able to take that money out of reserve funds. You don't want to have to do assessments, borrowing, or any combination of those three other than just reserves. Insurance and the incentives, which I mentioned. Also, just because a lot of people ask this question, for reserves, for example, a lot of times your reserve study has, let's say, 50 roofs. All the roofs are in one line item, and it says all 50 roofs are replaced in the year 2030. Keep in mind that that's a budgetary tool. So if you need a roof replaced now, the money comes out of your reserve study. That's what that money's for. You don't have to wait until the end of the useful life on the reserve study to do it. So, keep that in mind, because some people feel that you have to wait until the end of your useful life. It's really a budgetary tool. So sources of funds, again, you look at your reserve study, this is what it looks like, and you take a look at this and you go over here, it says estimated remaining useful life. Here's an item that has 1 year life, pavement seal coating. Now, you're probably not going to need an engineer to seal coat your pavement, but it gives you a clue here to use this as a planning tool that you're coming up on time when it's time to seal coat your pavement. And the thing about seal coating your pavement, keep in mind, is that you have 1 year life. If you seal coat your pavement, then you look at the line above it. It's pavement, mill, and 2-inch overlay, 6 years left. You may get more than 6 years because you seal coated it, where if you don't seal coat it, you may only get 3 years. So there's definitely connections between the things on your reserve study. And Stacy, if you wouldn't mind, if any questions come up, ask me, because I can't see the chat box right now. Thanks. All right, so this is how construction project, a planning process to do it. The involved parties is the community association, the community manager, the attorney, the engineer, and the contractor. I'm going to go through what each person's role is. But first, let's talk about the typical types of construction project. And I'm going to go through the other ones quickly, but because this is the typical way that it's done for community associations. You design it, you bid it, and you build it. That's the common way to do it. So what happens is an engineer like ourselves is retained by the community to prepare the designs and specifications for whatever the job is. Then it goes out to bid, and we work, the engineer works with the association of the client to select the contractor. And then during the job, you provide oversight during construction. So the contractor is working directly for the owner. So even in, this is the classic way to do it, so that we may be involved, or the engineer is involved in preparing the specifications, selecting the contractor, but the contract between the contractor and the client, which is the association, is between the two of them. That contract is not with the engineer who prepares the specs. We act as the eyes of the client in the field, but the contract is directly with the community. This is the classic approach, and I'm guessing that, and if there's anybody who uses something different, please throw it in the chat room so Stacy can tell me, but generally this is the way we see it for community associations, probably 99.9% of the time. Other models that are used: design, bid, build. Well, this is it again. You know, you have the
dumpster
has a contract with the association, and the design professional has a contract with the association. So there's no connection other than the design professional overseeing the contractor's work and preparing the spec. Who's the owner? The community manager is the owner's representative, or many people look at the community managers as the gatekeeper. That's another term for the owner's representative, but the community manager is the owner's representative for all matters associated with the capital project. Typically, we do work with associations where a board member is an active participant as the job goes on, but in most instances, the manager is the one who coordinates it on behalf of the association. So all matters associated with it, and they coordinate decisions with the association's board. So that's the most common way, but there is no question. And sometimes I think it's very good if a board member on the board is actually directly involved in the project, and it's not just the manager, because there are some decisions that need to be made pretty quickly. And also the actual client is the board. The manager, again, is the owner's representative. Who's the design professional? The design professional is somebody like us. It's typically an engineer or an architect who prepares the specifications and provides the contract administration services. And it says architect up there because certain types of projects you may get involved in a little more aesthetics than just engineering. So there might be an architect involved. At Kipcon, we actually have an architect on staff also. He's actually a licensed engineer and a licensed architect. So who's the contractor? The contractor is responsible for taking the spec and doing the work. And doing the work based on the price that they agreed to and the way the specifications show it. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding because the engineer goes out to look at the work to do contract administration on a periodic basis. They're not there all the time. So they're checking the work as it goes on. At a minimum, it's when the invoices come in to make sure the work was done in general conformance with the contract, but they're not all out there all the time. And you'll notice I use the term that they're checking for general conformance with the contract. We're checking for general conformance because we're there periodically. We're not there full time for one reason. And the other reason is the contract with the contractor says that they are required to do the work in specific accordance with the specifications. So the contractor is required for complete compliance with the contract and the spec, and the engineer is there to check for general conformance with that. But if there is a problem and something is not done in conformance with the spec or not done right, the contractor is responsible and the engineer is there to point it out. And it comes down to, some associations, the question always comes up, or a lot of times comes up, or I'd say probably always comes up, is that how often should the engineer be out there? Who makes the decision? Some communities want the engineer out there much more regular than other communities. And I'll talk about what the engineer does later, but we have found, just as a general guideline, that in order to have the engineer out there in an adequate number of times to do what's necessary to make sure the job is done right, it's going to cost in the range of 4 to 6% of the construction value. So one of the questions that comes up when we talk about this kind of thing with clients is that we give a lump sum price to do the specification. We do a lump sum price to go out to get a bid and get the prices. And then the question is, well, how much is it going to cost us for you to oversee the jobs? And there's no question that the way it works in this industry, other industries, is that engineers, including ourselves, are very, very competitive in the cost of the specifications, because once you get in and do the specifications, then you generally do the contract administration, and the contract administration fee is typically more than the specification. So associations don't want the contract administration portion of the job to be an open check. And like I said, we have found that it's generally 4 to 6%. We're actually in the process right now giving a proposal to the community that is replacing all the roofs, replacing all the trim on their buildings, and they're doing some siding work. They've got wood siding, and they're very interested in doing the entire job on a percentage basis, where in this case, it's going to be somewhere, it's depending on how long the job is done over, it's going to be in the range of 6 to 8% of the construction cost, where we will do everything. We'll do the spec, we do the bidding, we oversee the job on a very regular basis. And it's essentially a lump sum, but it's based on a percentage. And then it takes the guesswork out of the entire job, because the association knows that every time an invoice comes in, a percentage of that goes to the engineer for doing everything. So it used to be much more prevalent that the percentage basis was used, but most communities have kind of gotten away from that, which I think is you should really relook at that, because the percentage basis, if you're paying 8% of a construction cost to have everything being taken care of from an engineer, to me, it's a small percentage of the job, and also you get a full oversight and everything gets done. So I don't know how I got off on that and who's the contractor, but the next is the involved parties. And let's not forget the association's attorney. And the reason I say that is because the attorney is the one who reviews the contracts between the parties. For example, when we send a proposal to an association, our proposal has commercial terms in it. 99% of the time, the association signs that contract, the proposal, and it becomes the contract. In some cases, they have the attorney review the contract. In all cases, the way I've seen it is that if a contractor is going to enter into a contract with the association, even though our specifications have typical general commercial terms in it, since it's a very large dollar item component, it's typical that the association or the owner will have their attorney review the construction contract to make sure they're in agreement with it. You know, maybe I shouldn't say, but I think associations should more, have attorneys review the design contract with the engineer or the architect also. I would say 99% of the time, the attorney will review the construction contract. Attorney is very important, not only to review the contract, but also to, if there's ever a dispute or anything that comes up, then the attorney has already reviewed the contract and understands what the cure could be. So, I mean, and I'll talk about it in a little while, but attorney is a very important part of this, especially on big contracts. You should definitely have your attorney review the construction contract. That's all there is to it. So these are the involved parties. The construction documents. Those documents are the design drawings and the specifications. Now, let me tell you a little bit what the difference between the two is. But the design drawings are the drawings. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The architectural drawings for floor plans, elevations, things like that. The engineering are for the civil, structural, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, paving, roofing, all these kind of things. But it's the blueprints. And the blueprint term, I mean, has been around forever, but that's what these are. The design drawings are the graphical presentation of the project. Keep in mind that this graphical presentation shows how the job should end up. It does not get involved in the means of methods and methods of how to do it. The contractor who's responsible for getting you from generally the blueprints to what the contract to what the blueprints show, but the contractor is responsible for the means and methods of getting there. So, but the design drawings show how it should end up. So that's the purpose of the design drawings. Now, the specifications are, it's the written portion of the documents. So the other thing to keep in mind is when you have a construction contract with a contractor, it's not just the terms and the price that are in the contract. That contract has to say that as part of this contract are the blueprints, the design drawings, and as part of the contract are the specifications. They all go together. And for example, I was just talking to somebody yesterday and somebody's giving them a proposal to do a waterproofing on a basement. So I said, well, what's the warranty? So he says, well, the contractor told me this is the warranty. So I said, well, the thing you have to do is you have to get what the warranty is in writing, and it has to be attached to the contract, so it's part of the contract. So they all work together. They have to be connected. But the specification is the written portion, which describes products and quality standards. For example, if you're putting in new windows, the specification, the drawing may show, here's the window, here's how it's installed, but the specifications will say what type of window to install and these type of things. In a lot of instances, the specifications and this type of thing may be included on the blueprints. On bigger jobs, it's generally a separate thing, which is a book. So a lot of times the blueprints include the specifications, but the specifications are in a book form for the more complex jobs. In addition to that, which I'll talk about in a second, is the specifications also include the pricing sheet. So you may have blueprints that include the specifications of what materials to use, but then you have a separate specification that only includes a pricing page so the contractors know how to bid the job, but I'll get to that in a second. So the contractor should acknowledge that they've read the specifications and they've gone to the site. In our specifications, when we do it, and it's very important, there's a place in there where the contractor will sign the specifications where it says, I've read the entire specifications and I will do the work in conformance with the specifications. And if there are any changes, they're listed below. So the contractor can never come back and say, I misinterpreted the drawings and I did it this way. They have to sign off and say that there are no changes. It's going to be done exactly the way the drawings and the specifications say it. The other thing that it's not uncommon in the specifications, in some instances, contractors will use a subcontractor to do work. And the specifications will include something that the contractor signs off to say whether or not they're using subcontractors. For those of you involved with roofing projects on multiple buildings in a community, typically the contractor that has the job does use subcontractors. Subcontractors are very common on roofing projects. And so, if you're doing 10 buildings at the same time, there may be a different subcontractor on each roof working on it. So it's important for you to understand whether there or not there are subcontractors, because then there's also other forms that you may require that say that before you pay the master contractor, that they confirm that all the subcontractors have been paid already. So going in many different directions on this, but the contractor should acknowledge in the contract that they have read and agreed with all portions of it. And again, the specifications are not intended to be a means of methods. That's the contractor's responsibility. The specifications typically look like this. There's a front page, and it's roof remediation, in this case, bid form and specification. So I mentioned before that includes in it not only description of materials and things to be used, but the pricing page. Pricing page is very important, and we show an example in a second, but it's bid form so the contractors know how to bid it so that you can do an apples to apples comparison between them. And all this stuff leads to how do you select the contractor, because in order to select the contractor in the best way, you really need to have a lot of this information done in advance in terms of how to price it, signing off on the item with subcontractors, and signing off on doing it and conformance to the spec, having been to the site, all kinds of stuff. So the specifications include the advertisement for bid, which is a description of the projects when the bids are due. For example, description of the project is as simple as saying, we're going to be replacing the roofs on 50 buildings, which includes taking off the shingles and putting on new shingles. I mean, so it's as simple as that, but it's an overall description of the project, when the bids are due, instruction to the bidders, if there's a pre-bid meeting. Sometimes there's a pre-bid meeting primarily on complex jobs where the contractors come and the engineer is there and walks them around and answers any questions in regards to the job and the bids, how to bid it. They may ask questions of anything, how to submit the bids. Keep in mind that if any questions ever come to somebody like us during the bid stage of a project, what we do is we send out a notification or an addendum to the specifications to all the contractors, telling them what the questions were and what the answers are. So it's a level bidding field. So everybody does see the questions and the answers, because that's just the way it's done. The bid proposal form, again, this is the pricing. It's the format of the bids, lump sums, option prices, and those things are included in the bid proposal form. And then there's a certificate of ownership of who owns the contracting form, the contracting company. Then there's general and special conditions. These define the relationships. And you can see a lot of things that are in these specifications and these conditions are really standard legal terms that are included in a construction contract. So there are standard terms, but again, it's important that, especially on the bigger projects, that you have your attorney review these specifications and the terms and conditions to make sure they're in agreement with it, because we're just engineers and we're using the standard terminology used in the industry. But they're meant to define the relationships, method, retainage, for example, on a typical job, the contractor gets paid when a building is completed. For example, they get paid 90% of the construction cost, and 10% of that is held back as retainage because the engineer like us will go out and do a punch list of the building to see if there was any damage, and the 10% retainage is not released until the engineer says that the job is done in general conformance with the specifications and there's no damage. So that's a typical payment terms. It may include in their project schedule. For example, if a contractor says it's going to take 10 weeks to do a job, the association may then hire the engineer and say, we want you to go out there 2 times a week for 10 weeks, and this is how much is in there. But then, and that's is how much we budget for it. But if for some reason the contractor does not meet that schedule, there may be something in these conditions that say, if you exceed the schedule that you gave us, you're responsible for any additional engineering fees to oversee the job. One little asterisk I have to put on that is that job schedules do increase if the work increases. So if there's 10% additional work, because when they're taking it apart, they find additional work that needs to be done, the project schedule increases typically based on that same percentage. So what I'm talking about here as far as the damage against the contractor. So project schedule, but these are some of the things that are in the conditions. All right, here's the keyword for credits, Reserve Study Plus. So remember that if you want to get credits for today's class, it's Reserve Study Plus. Continuing on, general and special conditions include insurance requirements, general liabilities, workers' comp, all these kind of things. And the owner should also require certificates of insurance. They always require them from us and from contractors. It's very important that they get insurance certificates. And keep in mind that if there are subcontractors, like I mentioned before, there may be a requirement that the subcontractors provide insurance also to prove that they are insured as well as the main contractor. The insurance requirements typically include the association, management company as additional insureds on these policies. So that's to protect the other parties are involved, but insurance requirements are pretty important. Generally, the insurance, what the contractor has for insurance is shown on what's called a certificate of insurance, which is given to the owner. And as part of the bid, and a lot of times we as an engineering firm are asked to provide our certificate of insurance showing what kind of insurance we have also. Insurance is very important. Indemnifications, these contracts should include indemnifications. So if there's a problem, the contractor will indemnify the association, the management company, and the engineer, because by them indemnifying us means if they do something wrong and somebody gets hurt or something and they get sued, that they will protect us and we won't get dragged. Oh, well, we probably will get dragged in, but they're required by contract to protect us. First time I noticed that we have 2 different fonts here. I missed it. Oh well. So general and special conditions, including indemnifications. Indemnifications, I have to say, very, very, very important. A schedule of values. A schedule of values, when the contractor get paid, the schedule of values in simple terms says each building is worth this amount of money. So you know before the job starts exactly how much each building is worth. So when they request payment on that building, it should match this schedule of values. It includes the quantities, it includes many different things. One of the reasons we include in here schedule of values that includes quantities, you see this as the second item, is because we want to make sure when we get the bids from the contractors that they measured it right. And the quantities in this bid form should be pretty close for each contractor. They will never match exactly, but at least we can see by looking at the quantities whether or not they're measuring the same thing. If there's a big difference between one contractor's quantities and all the other contractors, they measured it wrong because it wasn't the other ones who did it. All right, schedule of values. There are forms, for example, this is the AIA document G702, which is sometimes used, which is a 2-part form, which has the main cover page, which shows a summary of the payment on everything on the job. And then the next page is that schedule of values. So for example, you look across here, it says building department allowance for permits and things. And there's amount of money here, scheduled value. And then as the work is completed, it's filled out in these columns. This is generally used this format is used many, many times all the time, but the AIA G702 forms are not always used, but it's the same information typically. Costing methods. Be very careful in terms of costing methods. There's lump sum, unit price, time and materials, cost plus fees, all kinds of things or combinations. When we're dealing with community associations, we're dealing with existing buildings. So typically there's a lump sum portion of the contract. For example, you're doing a paving job. you're milling off 2 inches of paving and you're putting down 2 inches of paving. So there's a lump sum. You can measure it. You can put an exact number against that. So the contract will include lump sum for paving. But then what happens if you peel off the paving, you mill it, and you find some damaged subbase below it? That is repaired on what's called a unit price basis. So in some instances, the unit prices can exceed the lump sum if you find a lot of damage when you start taking things apart. So when you're looking at these contracts, you need to look at both of these, because some contractors may give a low lump sum for the job and very high unit prices because they know there's going to be extra work. So you really have to look at both of them together. The other way to look at time and materials. Upfront in the contract and in the specifications should ask for the contractor's hourly rate for their laborers to do additional work, plus how much of a markup is on our materials. So it may say it's $50 an hour for labor, and then the additional material is the cost of material plus 5%. So time and materials is what that is, and that should be in the contract. Cost plus, very similar. What does it cost to do it plus a fee to do it? And then, like I said, there's always combinations in the jobs we're working on. Pavement, clearly I mentioned. Roofing, as soon as you take off the shingles, you're going to find damage. No matter what you're doing when you're dealing with existing building, there's always things that can happen that you don't anticipate. That's just the way it is, and you always have to protect yourself. From a budgeting standpoint, when we go out to bid on a contract, let's say it comes in as the lump sum of $100,000 and the unit prices, depending on the type of job and the condition of what we see, we always tell our client, the association, that you should add 20%, 25% to the lump sum. Not that you're going to spend it, but just so you budget it, because you are going to have to spend some money. So what we do is we say, this is what contingency you should include in your budget. It's not a contingency that goes to the contractor clearly, but it's for your budgeting purposes for what is going to be the real cost of doing the job. A couple other things, performance bonds. Performance bond is a bond you can get from a contractor that says if they go bankrupt during the job and they can't finish the job, there's a performance bond to complete the job. Generally, we don't have those in community association jobs. We do it a little different way. We generally, the jobs are paid for as the work is done. So the contractor does not get any money up front. And again, going back to the roofing jobs as an example, they get paid per building. So if they go out of business or disappear, they've been paid for the work they've done, but they haven't been paid for any work they haven't been done. So you would get another contractor for it. And if your payment terms are set up that way, it's the performance bond. It's typically not needed if payment schedules after work is completed. Deposits, contractors ask for deposits on materials and things like that before they start a job. I generally recommend against it. I think that as soon as they get a deposit, then it could lead to a problem. And I really like the idea of pay for the work you do and hold the retainage. And we generally recommend, even if they say you could save a few dollars on the materials, don't give money up front. It could lead to a problem. So most of the projects we're working on do not have deposits paid up front. Also, guarantees and warranties spelled out in the terms and conditions. Very clear. Roofing job, what is the warranty? How long does the warranty last? Who's the communication? It says in there. For example, it typically says that if there's any problems going on in the job, the engineer has to be notified. But it could say whatever you want it to say. Coordination of permits and inspections from the municipalities. Typically, it says in the contract that is the contractor is required to apply for the permits. Since they don't know how it's going to cost, it's not included in their cost for bidding the job, but then they apply for the permits, they give the association the bill, and it's paid. So the contractor coordinates the permits, and inspections from the municipality are the requirement of the contractor to coordinate and ask for, since they are the ones who solicit the permits. The permits are gotten by the contractor, not by the engineer. When you now we've done the specifications, then how do you select who it's going to bid? My theory is pretty simple. We will not send something out to bid to anybody who we ever have had a bad experience with, because if the contractor does a good job, it makes us look good, it makes the manager look good, it makes everybody look good. But the pre-qualified bidder list is based on experience, training, certifications. Can they provide warranties? For example, here you say the GAF Master Elite. In order to get a GAF Golden Pledge warranty on a roof, the contractor has to be a Master Elite certified contractor. So, that's how we establish the pre-qualification list. For example, we're bidding a roofing job. we won't accept a bid if you want a golden pledge warranty unless the contractor has a master elite status. We have seen cases where you have to be careful where the main contractor does not have that master elite status, but it's through the subcontractor. You have to be careful about who has these certifications and make sure it's okay for you. But that is what we do in establishing the pre-qualified bidder list. Typically, we will send to our client a list of bidders we'd like to bid it to, 3 minimum, and the client may look at it, the manager may look at it and say, take this one off, add this one type of thing. But that's generally the process of we go through for issuing it for bid, is that we work with you as the client and the manager. And again, we worked on one a number of years ago where it's a big roofing job, and somebody in the board's brother-in-law, somebody was a roofer. And they insisted on going out to bid with this guy, and the person actually got the job. After the first building, it was so screwed up they had to fire him. So you got to be very careful. And, you know, we warned them, it's in writing, but, you know, they insisted on using a certain contractor. So establish pre-qualified bidder list. Issued for bid, talked about the pre-bid meeting, pre-bid conference, mandatory or optional. There's a typical agenda for that. Receiving the bids. Who receives the bids? Formats for apples to apples review. And I talked about that before. In the bid form, it lists exactly how we want to receive the prices. So on the bottom here, you see a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet has base bid phase 1, base bid phase 2, base bid phase 3, base bid phase 4. And then in addition to that here, so this must be a paving job. It says mill and dispose, you know, install base course, install top course. So now you can look at contract X, Y, and Z and go across here and compare the prices. So, and you can see the bottom subtotal for each phase and what the prices are. The thing this sheet doesn't show is the unit prices. This is just the firm price portion of the job. But this is why it's very important to set up the bid sheet and the specifications to help select a contractor. Clearly, price is important, but don't ever forget, as I don't think I have to tell you, that these are not public jobs where you have to select the low bidders. You know, you do negotiate these projects when you select the contractors. So post-bid interviews, optional. You know, on the bigger jobs, I think it's a good idea to meet with the contractors because it's FaceTime and you can have a comfort level. But you narrow the post-bid interviews, narrow the bids to 3 maximum, interview with the associates, board manager, blah, blah, blah. All in one session, the typical agenda, sign-in sheet, questions, that kind of thing. But it's issued for bids. A lot of times there is interviews of the contractors, all how to select the right contractors. Negotiation. There's always negotiation on these jobs. What is the purpose of negotiation? Value engineering. What does that mean? Let's say the engineer specifies it doing it a certain way. Contractor may say, you know, if you make this slight change in the way the specifications show it, it does the exact same thing, but it saves so much in labor that this is a value, we can value engineer the design. Not uncommon. I will tell you that I'm an engineer, I'm not a contractor, and we like to work with the contractors to learn of more cost-effective ways to do construction jobs that give you the same result, but can be done in a less expensive way. So value engineering, I always encourage contractors to say, if you think there's a cheaper way to do it that's the same or better, please let us know. And that's value engineering. Confirm the low bids. You may get low prices, but the quantities may be wrong or something. So you really want to confirm the low bids. And sometimes you want to confirm the high bids. You know, if a contractor gives you a bid that's so much higher than everybody else, they may have misinterpreted the specification and they're a great contractor, but they went and they didn't interpret the specs right. So I say confirm low bids and confirm high bids. Discuss project schedule. Schedule is important. So as part of negotiation, discussing the project schedule, penalties, which I talked about, as well as subcontractors. The need for bond versus payment terms. One, you know, whether or not you want bonds or payment terms, again, I'm a strong believer in payment terms, but one of the nice things about asking for a price for a performance bond is the performance bond is typically based on a percentage of the construction cost. The higher the percentage is, the less financially strong that contractor is. So sometimes we'll ask for a performance bond, especially if it's a contractor we're not that familiar with, but a board member or a manager wants to use them, because if the cost for them to provide a performance bond is 15% of the construction cost, that means there's some financial problems, or then maybe they've had a lot of bonds called and stuff like that. So You know, you may want to ask for a performance bond cost, even though based on the payment terms, you're not going to need it. Cost savings based on payment terms, you can negotiate that also. Again, I really don't like that much for construction jobs, because typically that means give us a deposit up front and we may lower our price. But also it can be, let's say you're doing a roofing job over 2 years. The contractor may say, or a paving job over 2 years, say, okay, this is a 2-year job. We'll do it over 2 years. We'll lock in our labor costs for 2 years, but we're going to let the material costs fluctuate based on some industry standard, like there's a pavement index, where the pavement index shows the cost of pavement. Then they may say, we'll keep our labor the same, but the cost of materials will vary based on this index. So cost savings based on payment terms and negotiations. Other thing important with communities is, what are the working hours, where they put in their dumpsters, where they're putting the materials. So this is all part of the discussion. Negotiates opportunity, confirm that all parts of the specifications are clear, on and on. But it's also very important the bidders are not only clear on the work to perform, but also on the bid proposal form requirements. We have had contractors that even though we give them a form, they give us it back in a different format. It's a big problem and we won't accept it, because then we can't compare apples to apples the way we like to. The contracts. The contracts are between the community association engineer. I talked about this a little, generally prepared by the engineer and reviewed by the association's attorney. And keep in mind that you really, the contract and your comfort level with the engineer is just as important with the contractor. You know, if you're paying an engineer, whether it's Kipcon or any other engineer, you're going to be paying about the same amount for this type of services, these type of services during the construction. You really have to feel comfortable with them, and you should never select an engineer to do a job like this based on low price. It's got to be based on comfort, who's going to be out at the site and what they're doing. Price really is so insignificant in terms of the engineering fee in a construction job. It shouldn't be your deciding factor in terms of selecting the engineer to do a job. So, but the engineer's contract includes payment terms, insurance, commercial terms, schedule, the same type of thing. For example, I think I told you that we're in the process, hopefully getting a nice project based on a percentage of the construction cost. So what are the payment terms? Each time this contractor submits an invoice, we get a percentage of it, or how does it work? So these things are included in the engineer's contract also. Between the community association and the contractor, this is generally prepared by the association's attorney, who did bid documents that I talked about as attachments. And like I said, our specification typically includes the standard industry terminology for warranties and commercial terms, and it's really up to the attorney to take a look at it and approve it or disapprove it. But it describes the contractual requirements, payment terms, warranties, insurance schedule, all the things we've talked about. But see, work to be performed, the work to be performed is based on generally attaching the blueprints and the specifications to the contract, and it all becomes one document. What are the contracts? Contracts are the basis for the relationships. Pretty straightforward. You forget the contracts when the project goes smoothly. The only time you ever look at a contract is if there's a problem. So that's what the contracts are for. The owner-engineer contract includes the scope of services. Generally for an engineer like us, it includes the construction documents, which are the blueprints and the specs, bidding and contract administration. Talked about that. The owner contractor should describe the work, payment terms, all the kind of stuff. Limits liability. Again, I'll mention this indemnification is very important, and it should be included in the contract. Contract administration. I went through all this in the beginning. It's the engineer for general conformance, the construction to do field inspections. There should be a field report each time the engineer goes out there to document the conditions in words and a lot of pictures. Interpretation, evaluate and recommend additional work. For example, the engineer generally approves additional work. Let's say there's pavement, you're milling the pavement and there's damage underneath. The engineer is typically involved in going over it with the contractor and the manager, if the manager is involved, or the board members, to determine what work should be done and how much it's going to cost when you find things after you take the pavement off, you take the roofing off, those type of things. Engineer, contract admin, review progress of work to authorize payment, prepare a punch list. Again, the engineer is not responsible for supervision. If they see a safety issue or something, if we were to see a safety issue, we should notify the supervisor of the contractor, but it's not our responsibility to tell anybody on a job what to do or how to do it. We're not responsible for means and method. Contractor is still responsible for, I don't know what this word is because there's something missing, but it's not still, contractors are still responsible for their work. Cost reduction techniques, consolidate multiple projects of the same type when bidding. We have worked with management companies in the past, but very, very rarely. And if they have 5 or 6 roofing projects going on at the same management company, you know, you guys should look at more, maybe using the same engineer, doing it in such a way that you can bid multiple projects at the same time because you can get discounts. I will tell you that this new Reserve Study Plus software, if it's for with a management company, we will be telling the management company that we did reserve studies on 5 of your communities. 3 of these communities have roofing jobs coming up in the next year. You may want to consolidate them somehow. But consolidate multiple projects. Also say that with reserve studies. You know, reserve study season is coming up. Ask us for proposals for 10 sites at the same time instead of 1 at a time. And I promise you there will be savings and costs that you could transfer to your communities. Review available incentives. I told you about DSIRA USA. Take a look at a great program. Review break-even periods, including maintenance and energy. Maintenance and energy, just because the piece of equipment is cheaper doesn't mean that it's cheaper. And what I mean is that the replacement cost per year may be $10,000. The energy cost may be another $10,000 per year. But now you're replacing with a higher efficiency piece of equipment. The replacement cost may be $12,000 a year, but the energy cost goes down to $5,000 a year. So when you add the 2 together, you're saving $3,000 a year. So review these break evens. You know, another idea is you have a wood fence. Wood fence has, let's say, a 15, 20-year useful life. Replace it with a vinyl fence. Then it may even come off your reserve study. But you may want to consider having what's called a green reserve study, where that not only takes into account the replacement cost of the components, but also the maintenance costs and the energy costs of those components. And I promise you that when you're doing replacements in your community, a lot of times the decision on what you do will change if you look at the cost of replacement plus the cost of maintenance or energy. Minimize risk. You have to understand the roles of each party. You want to minimize the risk when you select the contractors. Make sure you're selecting a good contractor that has good references, that you've worked with before, and you know is going to do a good job. Minimize risk, that's for sure. Contractor is responsible for executing the construction documents. Engineer is responsible for developing them, and it's the owner's eyes and ears on the site. I mentioned a lot of these things as risk management already. Low price is not always the best. Establish base payment terms. Match services needed with proper expertise. Managers do not get in trouble, because I have worked with many managers over the years where the boards think that the managers have the capability to do inspections during construction. Don't let that happen to you, because you'll only get in trouble. The best managers and the best engineers are the ones that understand their experience and don't go above it and know when it's not something that is their expertise. So managers, make sure you do not get involved in overseeing roofing or paving jobs. Unless it's your expertise, of course, but be very careful. Why pay an engineer for free when I can get it from a contractor? Contractor may say, why do you need an engineer? I'm giving you a warranty on the roof. Nothing is free. You can get better pricing when you go out to bid this way. Get an apples comparison, consistency in the bids, and predictable results. And you have a third party. You don't have big contractor watching themselves to do the job right. All right. Now my commercial, very quickly. I generally don't do a commercial, but you probably saw this in all the CAI magazines. We're introducing the Kipcon Reserve Study Plus, and what it includes is, included in there is the ability for a client who has a reserve study by us to go in the back office through a password to our website to actually make adjustments to their own website during the year to see, you know, if they replace a roof or something, they can change it and useful lives and things, and they can play around with their own reserve study by going through in a password. Annual updates, very inexpensive annual updates. Also, I said reports of projects. You would be getting an email each year saying what projects you are planning for the next year based on your reserve study. And the other thing in here is that if you do a Kipcon Reserve Study Plus, then we are going to be considering you to be a client of ours, and there will be a discount of all engineering services that we provide for for the following year. So you'll know that there'll be a discount on our hourly rates just by us doing work for the client. And it's not just reserve studies. When we do work for associations, if they come back to us for repeat business, we will be giving discounts because they are considered to be a client. So that's what my commercial, I very rarely do commercials, but thank you. Any questions? If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. We'll be sending you a copy of this presentation. If you need a certificate for continuing educations, either email me, this is my email address, Stacy, who's been on here, Stacy Imber at Kipcon.com, and Jeff Payne, he's also involved in business development and marketing at Kipcon. So feel free to email any one of the three of us or call us. If you'd ever like to have this presentation given to your management company, given to individual boards, a group of your boards, whatever you want, please feel free to contact us and we would love to do that. And I think I started 4 minutes late and I ended 4 minutes late. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And does anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions, so hopefully I answered anything. But if you ever have any questions, please feel to reach out to us. If you ever have a concern at one of your communities, just email us a picture of what it is, and we'd be happy to get back to you with our comments. And that's really it. We don't charge you for doing that kind of thing. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.